Welcome back. This is Jana with Purl Together, and I am honored today to have Sarah Schira from Imagine Landscapes. And I have to say, so I was a little nervous this morning, like, oh, she's my first designer guest, you know, right? That's kind of cool for me. Right.
Yeah, we, my sister and I do an audio podcast, and so mostly it's just the two of us chatting, and we've done a couple where we've had a guest on, and it's like, oh my goodness, how do we go with the flow, or do we really have like set questions, and who's in charge of the rhythm? And there's a lot when you bring someone that you don't have like a background or built up set of cues with.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure we'll be fine. So how did you get started knitting? I mean, did you learn as a child? Have you been knitting your entire life?
I sure wish I had. I did that thing where I think both of my grandmothers taught me how to knit when I was about 8 or 10. I remember knitting. I remember terrible yellow acrylic yarn on red plastic needles. It was super squeaky and super sticky. And I kind of did like a little doll scarf kind of thing. And it was terrible in a garter stitch. But no one ever said what else I could do with it. I think I'm I'm pretty product oriented and skill oriented. And I think if someone had said, you can do this now, and this is just your learning process, and then next you could do X or Y, like nobody told me the point of keeping at it. Even though I could see my grandmothers producing things like Afghans or sweaters, I think they never said I could do that. It's, there was such a gap.
So you kind of had that disconnect where it's like, that's what the grown-ups do. What can I do?
Yeah. So I like, no one told me like that there was like a good next step to keep up. There was no point for the next. And because I was the oldest child and none of my cousins lived near us, there was no model of people progressing past terrible acrylic
doll scars.
So I dropped it. And then when I was mother of, so I have 2 children, Sandra and Matthias. Sandra is now 22 almost, and Matthias is 19, and we homeschooled. And at one point when my daughter was about 6, we were reading the Laura Ingalls Wilder out loud, and we were doing all that, homeschooly, cuddly stuff. And she said, I think I'd like to learn how to knit. And I said, oh, okay. And like you do when you're a homeschooling mom, you go to the library, and I got a couple books out.
And you figured it out, right?
Yeah, and I figured it out, and I sort of showed her, and she does it a bit, and she's sort of dabbled all the way through. But I was like, something clicked, and from the get-go, I was like, this is astonishing. And here's what I think. Okay, so as a homeschooling mom, everything I did was either intangible, like teaching someone to read, or giving love, or dealing with
conceptual, and it's all emotional, feely stuff. Sure.
Yeah, or it was my children's work. Yes. So anything that was ambitious that was going on was there, like they produced it. Mm-hmm. Or I did it, but it needed redoing instantly. I fed the kids, they were hungry. I washed the laundry, it was dirty.
Yeah, nothing lasts.
But knitting, when I came back to it, it stayed done. I could touch it, I could see progress, and it never undid itself. Like maybe I had to undo it, but it stayed.
Well, that's another topic.
Yeah.
I get what you're saying. That's fantastic, and it's satisfying, especially for someone in that situation where you're a young mom and nothing stays clean, nobody stays fed, nobody stays, all the clothes need done every week. It's satisfying and it's rewarding, and it still feels that way, doesn't it?
It does, and what was also special about it was mine.
Yeah.
And I could do it. One of the things that I think that made it so compatible was like a lot of what you do as a homeschooling mom is you learn together, and then they have to put it into practice. And if you walk away from the table to, like, let's say, do the laundry, they also walk away from the table. So you needed to be near them, but not messing with them. So like, not like, do the next question. Come on, like, hurry up, like, go. Like, so you have to be there, but be kind of patient. So if they had a question, I was not available mentally. But knitting, I could do knitting and.
Right, for sure. Yeah, that's fantastic. So let me back up a little bit because I forgot to ask you this in the beginning just for the sake of our viewers. So we've all listened to you talk for a few minutes now, and we realize that you pronounce your vowels slightly different than Americans do, like process and about, which is fantastic. I have Canadian envy. I mean, Canadians are also nice, really. I mean, I have often said to my husband, can we just move? Can we just move? Get our passports, move to Canada. And he's like, Well, maybe.
Yeah,
Right.
it's a bit of a process.
Right. So, but tell everybody where you're from, because yeah.
Yeah, so I live in Canada. We moved a lot when I was a child, but I'm mostly from the prairies. My parents are from Ontario, so all of my family is out there, but we've lived in the prairies, mostly what I would consider urban prairie. So we've lived in a lot of large towns and cities.
Even though that sounds like a total oxymoron, doesn't it? Urban prairie.
Yes. Yeah. But like my landscape is prairie, but my setting is urban.
Right. No, I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
And the viewers, when I say prairie, they know that where I live, like I do not have a neighbor within a mile and a half. Like nobody.
Yeah. And I live in a small university city with about 50,000 people. And I live right down in the historic like center in an old Victorian house. And I'm right in the middle of a city. It's not a big city, but it's a city. So Canadian provinces are much bigger than most American states. They're more like Alaska or bigger. And so usually what happens is the cities there tend to be a couple bigger cities and they sort of share the population. And so most of the places I've lived, there's been several bigger cities, but Manitoba is super weird. We have 1 million people that live here and 700,000 of them live in one city.
Right.
And then Brandon at 50,000. And then there's the next one is like, I think maybe 20,000. Like we're the second biggest city and we are so outclassed. It's like Mercury and Jupiter. Like there's
say the name of your town again, because either your internet connection or mine stalled out a little bit, so we didn't.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Just say the name of what you were talking about.
Okay, so the big city is Winnipeg and I live in Brandon.
Okay. So you went back to knitting, and when you arrived back at that, how many years ago was that, do you think?
Okay, so I'm pretty sure my son was like 4, so it'd be 15 years ago.
Okay. Wow. So, yeah, you've been like moving right along.
Yeah. So like I got into knitting before the internet changed. You know, like when it became interactive and full of video. So I still learned to knit mostly from books and then reading online forums, but not having pictures or videos or podcasts or.
Right. And you learned probably like I did in that same kind of era where you had, Interweave and Vogue magazine, or you had the leaflets that were from the store, or you could get printed patterns, but you might have to call and order them. Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there are no yarn stores where I live.
Yeah.
So I also had very little like community support. And so one of the first books I read was Stitch and Bitch, and then the second Stitch and Bitch book, which basically teaches you how to hack patterns. And I credit that with giving me the sense that, oh no, if I want this hat to have that cable, I can figure that out.
Right.
And because I was knitting for, my family's super knit-worthy. They adore wearing knitted stuff. And so my son and my husband, there was almost nothing out there for guys that wasn't pretty terrible. And so I started improvising really right away. And that's basically, I've designed for my family for a long time before I decided to start actually doing multiple sizes and putting it out there, which is super nerve-wracking.
You were talking about resizing and adapting and, modifying patterns from the Stitch and Bitch books, which we'll link below. But then immediately what came to mind was, the gnome hat with the cables, right? The gnome pattern, and how fantastic that is. So then I lost you again for a second, and then you were saying how you started designing for your family. Right.
Yeah. So basically I started improvising, and then I would design for my family because I couldn't find what I wanted.
Yeah.
But it was the big leap was deciding to like make it in multiple sizes and figure out how to do the math for an average. Like, what are the averages? What is a medium? As opposed to like, I would just measure my husband and make a hat for him. So that was the big leap, right? Was multiple sizes and figuring out what the standards were.
Well, I'm excited now to go like look on your designer page. I mean, I've knitted the gnomes, but I haven't tried any of your other, your other patterns yet. So now I'm all excited to go check them out. Like Q.
Yeah, I do a lot of accessories. The fact that the gnomes are the big hits, it's surprising because like I don't think of myself as a toy designer. I'm an accessories designer who obsesses about gnomes, but I guess I need to start thinking about myself the other way around.
I don't know. I mean, you don't have to pigeonhole yourself at all. I just thought that's how I found you. So that's my association with that's how I discovered you.
Yeah.
So,
No, I do love the gnomes. Like the reason I knit dozens of them myself. And the reason that first pattern was called Never Not Gnoming is because that's what my son used to be like, keep joking, like, oh, once she starts, she is never not gnoming. Like,
there's another one, and they all have names.
Yeah.
So you said in addition to the gnomes, some of your other like favorite things to knit, you said are mostly accessories. So are you big into the sweaters and all that, or is it mostly other?
Well, so I love knitting sweaters, but designing sweaters is kind of intimidating. So when I started, once my kids were old enough that I realized it was time for me to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, and that like I was contributing to our family in a very non-economic way, but I wanted to start contributing in an economic way. Accessories are much faster to design and produce, and I thought I wanted to sort of get out there and sort of show people that I was reliable and that I could produce quality, and to do that at a frequency, sweaters didn't make a lot of sense. So I did a bunch of sweaters for my family. Again, those were one-offs. So I've been designing sweaters for a while, but not for everyone. So just actually right now, I'm about to publish my first sweater. Yeah, it's going to come out sometime in January. I was hoping this week, but I'm like a little overworked.
Well, and then you're taking a morning to talk to me, and we appreciate that. So that's awesome. But yes, definitely shoot me a message. We'll watch for when that comes out. Absolutely.
It's got gnomes on it. Well, I kind of was like, well, it's kind of my thing right now. Is I really went with like, so.
Oh, I saw the hat. I saw the gnome. Yeah.
And the mittens.
Right. Yeah.
And this is the third part of that set. It's called Go Big or Go Gnome. And
I love it.
Yeah, I love that pattern trio. And so I'm just getting the final details back from my testers about the test part of the sweater, and I want to make sure that the formatting's all good and that my yardage numbers are right. That's one of the things I love test knitters for, is not just finding the errors, but like I do not like estimating yardage for different sizes. I don't know that I am the best ever at it, and so the test knitters, I adore them for confirming my math.
Well, and people are so different. You know, like you mentioned earlier, you know, what is a medium? I mean, you know, a medium for you is different than a medium for, I mean, I'm certainly not a medium. I'm a large person. I'm not a medium. My kids might be a medium, but we're like gargantuan people, you know? So
and it's so weird how gauge, like even though like test knitters are supposed to be fairly accurate with gauge and all this stuff, it's amazing how I can have people at the same size and get numbers that almost are like half to double. Like, you know, like one person will use 100 yards for something and another will use 200 yards. And I'm like, what do I do with that information? Like, who's the outlier? And
we've been talking so much about that in the group lately. We're doing a sock knit along right now, and people, you know, our group consists of, you know, everybody from very, very experienced knitters to brand new, I just learned last month people. And so, you know, on the YouTube channel, there's a huge cross section as well as the Facebook group. And so people are like, well, how many yards do I need for this? I'm like, well, it depends on your gauge. It depends on the density of your fabric. It depends on the combination of the yarn and the needles and the fabric that results from that. And that's going to vary a great deal from you to me, even. Yeah. And it's just fascinating to me how different that is. And people get so hung up and so rigid. I'm like, no, you got to swatch. You have to determine what's going to work for you. Otherwise, you're just going to end up, you know, ripping. And that's no fun for anybody. Yeah. You know?
No, exactly.
What would you say to date has been your most personally challenging project? Like, not that you've designed necessarily, but that you've knitted, that you've made. That, you know, something that's been super challenging.
Well, my first thought was a design. If you want to stare at me while I think for a moment. Let's just go with the design. So I think it was 2016, we went to Europe for a month. My husband's from Germany. And I set a very public design challenge. And I said, I am going to order Wollmeise yarn and have it shipped to my in-laws. And I will take no stitch dictionaries with me. And I will design a shawl based on the things I see, inspired by what I see, using freely available online stitch patterns. and I will complete this while I am traveling.
What possessed you to do that? Oh my word.
Challenges.
I mean, I just went, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't get it completely finished by the time we were there, but you know, like I got a lot done, and that was one of the harder ones. The more you do something, the easier it gets, and my brain is much better at designing on the needles than on paper or on a chart. But I was trying to take ideas that were very much inspired by what I had seen and find ways to interpret that. And so I needed to do like charting, a lot of charting to see like when would I transition from this pattern to this pattern. And so that was quite a challenge, because there was like the travel part, there was the workload part, there was the how do I find the stitch pattern part, and like the pressure. I felt an almost instant pressure to find an inspiration point so I could start the shawl.
So are you one of these people that works better under pressure? Like you procrastinate and then you're like, oh, I had to buckle down, and then you work really well under pressure?
No. Or maybe I just put pressure on myself all the time, and so, but I'm pretty productive.
So of course, we're all wondering now.
Yeah.
What's the resulting pattern from the German shawl?
Okay, so it's called the Traveling Landscape Shawl, and it is a 2-color shawl that uses 300 grams, because one of the things about Wollmeise is their skeins are 150 grams.
Yes.
So they've got really big skeins.
They're fantastic.
Yeah, I knit it in like sort of a burgundy and a gray. And so the gray part is inspired by, I love the cobblestones in Germany and all the different textures, and the way that, even though it's just cobblestones, it's always a little different. They've got different ways of arranging them and sizes. And so I look down a lot when I'm in Germany. So the gray is much more of like a textured cobblestone. But when we went to the Netherlands for a little bit, and in Maastricht, we saw this amazing Gothic church that had been created out of a red stone, like such a red stone. So it was a Gothic cathedral, and Gothic is all like ornate curlicues and really extraordinary. And it was red. And I was like, there we go. So there's like kind of arched lace with a little bit of cabling for the red. And then the gray is much more of like a sort of a chevron texture pattern. So for the cobblestones. And
so I'm going to go find a photo of this. I'm going to find a photo of this and put it here. And obviously we'll link down below to the pattern. I'm assuming the pattern's available.
It's one of my free patterns. And the way I do free patterns is I've got everything hidden behind one page on my website is password protected. And if you sign up for my newsletter, I send you the password, and then you get access to all the free patterns that are kind of like locked away there.
What do you currently have going on? Like, I know you have something on the needles right now.
I do. I keep glancing down. So right now I'm designing something else with Wollmeise, actually, which is, just very coincidental. But they put out this new product called Rolls. So it's 150 gram sock blank. That's a gradient.
Oh.
They're just stunning. And I've been doing a lot of design work that's very involved, or like it requires me to really be on my A game. And I had this deep seated urge to get that part of knitting where it's just stitch after stitch. So this design is incredibly simple, and I'm talking till I'm at the end of the row. This design is super simple.
Let me say, a lot of people here in the States, particularly in rural areas like me, have never heard of Wollmeise. And if I'm thinking of the same company, which I may or may not be, I have 2 skeins in my stash that I've had for probably a decade. And even back then, 10, 11 years ago, they were expensive at the time. And they were like 150 grams of very vibrantly dyed sock yarn.
And it's super sturdy. Like I really want to try a sweater out of it, because it is one of those ones that's like lots of little plies, lots of twisting. It's the kind of thing that will wear like iron. So
this is the same company, right? I'm not confused. Okay.
Yeah.
And even back then, those skeins were like $30-something a piece.
I think they're not quite as expensive now. I don't know. The rolls were pricey, but again, I'm paying in Canadian dollars.
Oh, well, right. Sure.
And so,
yeah.
But it definitely wasn't cheap. But on the other hand, because they're 150 gram huge gradients, and they're not like skinny like a sock blank.
Okay.
They're like a much wider fabric so that the color change. So I got 2 of them when I was in Vancouver. And what I'm doing is I'm knitting them on the bias.
Oh,
hang on, I'll get to a point where it's stripy.
Oh, see, that's lovely. I love.
Yeah. So one skein started purple and is going black. And the other one started black, went to navy, and now is going to sky blue.
And so you're alternating your skeins then?
Yeah. So I've got the 2 of them, and I'm striping them against each other. And
are you just carrying them up the side?
Yeah, because it's only a 2-row stripe. It's
right.
real easy to do that. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but this is the edge where that's being carried. Yeah. And so it's just like a slightly longer stitch almost is what it looks like.
So can you hold up the blank or the skeins?
I actually ended up frogging. I had a problem a couple weeks ago and I had to like completely frog the project back. I forgot to account for when you put something on an angle, it shortens.
Yes.
So I cast on the right number of stitches if I was doing it flat to get the right width.
Right.
And then I tragically realized I was designing what would have been an extraordinarily long 300 gram scarf.
For sure. So here's
at that point, because I would have had to wrap the frogged yarn around the sock blank. And so to pull from it, it would have been like, I don't know, this super awkward thing. So I just, I frogged the whole skein.
Right.
Or the whole sock blank. So hang on.
And then you rewound it, clearly.
Yeah. So now it's really, hang on, where's my light coming from? I basically hit super simple blue and black, black, black.
Okay. Well, that looks black, black. Yeah.
Yeah.
So seeing that though, seeing the cakes answers my next question. Because I was going to ask you, do you find when you frogged it, I was going to ask you if you reskeined it and steamed it and then wound it, to get rid of the kinkiness. I was going to ask you that.
I did think about it.
Well, and the thing is, it really bothers some people to knit from a sock blank because it feels like you're knitting with yarn that's been knitted because you are.
Yeah, and I don't like the feeling of the texture. And I think that if I'd been knitting a sock, it would have been more problematic for me because I really want my socks to be dense and hard wearing.
Yes.
And the texture of the squiggle can fight against your ability to get the stitches to lay sort of more normally.
Yeah,
I think the sock that might have bothered me.
That you want. Right.
Yeah. But I'm knitting this on much bigger needles and I'm going for an open drapey stockinette fabric. And so
and you'll block it, Yes.
And it should, with a good thorough soaking, really relax and release.
Does it just bother you though? Do you find that the squiggles affect your tension in your finger?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's not that maybe that big of a deal with a shawl, but I would not I have never knitted socks from a sock blank for that reason because it would irritate the dickens out of me. I just couldn't deal.
Yeah, like it does. So you can see that it's right, but when you tension it
a little bit, right,
to stretch it out, it does. So like literally wrapped around my fingers, it wraps straight.
So you're a continental knitter. You're tensioning with your left hand.
And I do it weird. I've got it wrapped twice around my left hand. So purling's like the speediest thing ever because all I have to do is flick my hand down.
Ooh, show us.
Okay. So when I purl, hang on.
Let's watch Sarah knit.
Yeah, just hang on. I'm going to knit, and then I actually need to purl this row. So let's see how. So, this is heavy enough to be awkward. Hang on.
No, that's okay. And I know this is like spur of the moment awkwardness for you, and I apologize.
So can you see what I'm about to do?
Yes.
So if I purl, all I do is flick it down and up.
Oh, right. Because the yarn's already forward. Oh, wow.
Yeah. I do a little push with my finger to kind of push the yarn around my needle, but it's like really fast and easy.
It's so interesting to me, people's different techniques. It's fascinating. And what you just did, the way that you wrap your yarn around your finger, you're Canadian, so I'm going to assume that you're familiar with the Yarn Harlot.
Yeah.
Have you seen her videos? I've seen some uploaded to YouTube by just random women about her Irish cottage knitting and the style in which she knits.
I have seen them, but it's been years since I looked and paid attention for technique.
she's like lightning fast. I mean,
Yes.
crazy.
Right.
But just because those women had to knit in a production way to feed their families. I mean, so they couldn't be like, throwing like, how Americans are like, whoa, and we wrap and we're like super slow. These people had to get it worked out so they didn't have repetitive stress injuries, and, they could produce a sweater in a reasonable amount of time and make it an economic endeavor. I am not very fast. That's something I continue to work on and explore different techniques to be faster, because I find for myself, when I'm teaching people to knit, like I got to stay ahead of my class, right?
Yes.
Right. So sometimes I don't sleep much because I'm not that fast. So I'm always trying to improve that for myself, because I'm not.
Yeah. I think for me, it comes down to sort of like, I learned to knit without looking by just doing like one stitch at a time, or, you put your needle in and then you look up and you complete the stitch, and you kind of like half stitches and then full stitches. And then with speed, when I'm trying to work on speed, I just say like, do it fast for like 10 stitches.
Right.
And then like, right. So you don't have to be fast the whole time. Yeah. Just sort of give yourself like little, okay, now, and then rest, and then now, and then, and I think it's one of those things you can get a lot faster at, but you have to sort of, you do have to decide it.
You have to minimize your movements, so you're not like, a big thrower, right? I'm a thrower, but I'm working on learning to be a flicker, not a thrower, right?
Yeah.
So that's,
little movements are much faster.
Much better. So because I don't necessarily, I enjoy the process. I mean, I guess I'm a combination of a product and a process knitter, because I enjoy both a great deal. But I do find that, when I'm working on a bigger wrap or a sweater, it does get tedious and I want to be faster, or I need to stay ahead of my class.
Yes.
So there's that. So how many, on the same kind of thread here, how many works in progress, are you like a monogamous knitter? Or are you like, oh no, I have 15 things going at once?
Right now I have more going than I would prefer. I tend to like being a 3-project person. The third one is only because I now have like a mitered square blanket on the go, but I don't consider that a work in progress if I'm not in the middle of a square.
Okay, fair enough.
Because it's not like unfinished. I finish a square, I get like that beautiful check mark kind of feeling, like, woo, ding, and then I can move on. And it's like technically a work in progress, but in my brain and the way I feel about it, it doesn't feel unfinished because I finished the square.
Right, and you can set it down for a time, and that's one of those longer terms. It's okay if it takes a year or more to finish. That's fine.
Definitely, or more for me. So I've got that on the go, but then I usually like to have 2 projects on the go. I like to have a big one and a little one, and one of them should be more complicated than the other.
Right.
And I kind of mix it up. Usually the little one's a sock.
Right.
And that'll usually be stockinette and something I'm not thinking about. Partly because of the designing, I'd like to have things that require 0 thought, so that when I'm like, say, done, like, because some of the design stuff, it's really thinky and I'm processing and I'm trying techniques, or I'm knitting and I'm not sure if it's going to work, and I may have to frog back and like take that section out or something. So to know that the sock is there and it's not going to go wrong, that feels really good. And my whole family loves socks.
That's Zen knitting. That's relaxing Zen knitting, where you can like, it's a palette cleanser, right? Yeah.
So I like my knitting to be able to be both the transformative meditative side and also the super crunchy challenging side. And so that's why I think 2 projects is really great for me.
Right.
And I don't get anxious that I've got so much stuff undone, which is why right now I have a couple things that are technically, no, not technically, they are unfinished and they are like nagging at me. And it feels untidy and like a burden rather than a joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you don't need that. Nobody needs that.
No, but other people feel like if they're production knitting or they're like only working on one thing, then that's really hard for them. So
now things are a little bit different in Canada. Like, you have different brands available to you. We talked a little about the Wollmeise, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that in the German way correctly.
You're pretty close.
Yeah. But then what are some of your other favorite squishy, like, this is just a joy to knit with?
Ooh.
I know, there's so many. I know.
That was a tricky one. I really, really like Sweet Georgia, who's Canadian, and Tanis Fiber Arts, who's Canadian. Okay. I really like their color sense, and their bases are both nice to feel but don't crumble. Like, some of the nicest feeling ones are also the most vulnerable yarn.
Yeah, they're not as durable as we might like. Right.
Yeah. That is a hard one. I would be totally honest. If I could only knit with one brand for the rest of my life, it would be Malabrigo.
I've heard that. I've had several people be like, ooh, you have to. I've had Malabrigo sock. I've had that. In a swap group I was in on Ravelry, I actually acquired through a swap. I acquired some of their sock yarn. Again, this is many years ago, but I haven't had any of their others. So like, I need to get a hold of some worsted maybe to
that. And their Rios is extraordinary because like they have one that's called Malabrigo worsted and it's a single ply. So it does tend to get kind of pilly because merino single ply. I mean, it's amazing to work with. It's like knitting a kitten. Which is, like without the wrestling. But the Rios is their worsted weight that's plied. And so you get their incredible depth of color and a real sense of softness, but it has a balance to it and it doesn't like pill and stuff like that.
So would you be adventurous? Would you knit an entire Afghan from that, knowing, that I have kids and
yes.
I'm about
the Rios, 100%.
Okay. Good to know, because I have a project going in my noodle, and so I'm wondering about. That's a good recommendation. I'm writing that down.
You should. They would definitely be my desert island company if I could only do one. They're single ply, their sock, everything. It's just like, I just love looking at it. They've got a really amazing DK called Arroyo strand, so it's multi-plied, and so it wears really well. And like knitting hats or mitts out of that, because it's nice because it's like a sport DK, and so it's not tiny like fingering weight, but it's also not huge like worsted weight. And I know not everybody lives in the prairies where it's really cold, and so it's one of those nice, like maybe we would call it an American winter yarn.
Well, we'll link to that below, and I appreciate the recommendation. I have a project coming up that I may need a great quantity of worsted for.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's not cheap, but man, a color on Malabrigo is one of the best colors. Like, holy cow, you'll see it in person and it does things. And as a designer, the way it changes the photographs that you can make, the possibilities for the depth in photography. I mean, because people can't touch what I knit and say, oh yeah, that design works for me. They have to do it entirely visually. Right. And when a yarn responds to the camera the way Rios and their other yarns do, it's a gift.
Yeah. I'll definitely look into getting some of that. And sometimes, there's places like Webs that sometimes have decent sales, or Little Knits. Little Knits is in Seattle. Sometimes they have sales. I'm not in a big hurry. I just, a good thing for me to look up for sure. So I think you already answered. We were talking, one of my next questions was kind of what's your favorite travel project, but I think socks usually then, right?
Yeah. My husband only wears hand knitted socks now and has for several years. And he wears them even in summer, like year round, only the socks. And he tried to learn how to knit, but his thumbs cramped so badly that so it's all me. And basically, I kind of spent about 2 years not knitting him many socks. And then, there's that where you're totally fine and then everything blows apart. We called 2018 the year of the sock apocalypse, where we threw out 14 pairs.
Do you darn them?
It wasn't like a hole. It was like at the ball of his foot. Okay. He'd worn it till it was just the nylon mesh left.
Yeah, you just need to start over at that point.
Like they were see-through for inches.
Yeah, that's not a hole. That's just worn out. Yeah,
you can't darn that. That'd be like you'd have to pretty much darn the whole. Yeah.
Well, just start out for sure.
So I've set myself a goal between whenever I set my goal, maybe it was in July, till our anniversary. I wanted to knit 7 pairs because that's a full fresh week, So that I thought was pretty good. I've knit 4 of the 7, so I'm doing okay.
How long does it take you to knit 1 pair?
Well, if I'm doing nothing but that, I could probably do it in a week.
Yeah.
But I'm not doing nothing but that. And
well, of course, obviously you're designing and, actually doing other things that are.
Yeah. And I do mean like nothing but that. That's like when I'm not working.
Do you prefer cuff down or toe up?
Cuff down. I memorized how to do them. It's also, I find the heel flap
Yeah.
And the traditional gusset fits our feet. I tried some short row toes, and I tried some other stuff, and the socks like literally like did that thing where they like started slooching and slooching, and then in the
We
shoe.
call it schlumping. Like,
yeah.
I know.
So
okay.
I need that.
Can I just say I love you more now just because of that, right? I learned to knit. My first sock was cuffed down. It was out of a book called Folk Socks by Nancy Bush.
Yep.
It was the classic sock pattern, and this was probably 16, 17 years ago, because my oldest was not born yet, quite, and she just turned 16. So I knew how to knit before that, but that was my first sock. And so I think maybe that was a sentimental time in my life, and that's partly the way I prefer it. But I agree with you totally. It fits my foot better. What I'm talking about, the tutorial I just uploaded last night was a knit along that we're doing, where we are at the point where we're turning the heel.
Which is wizardry.
I know.
Oh my goodness.
I just feel so satisfied every time.
I have never not turned a heel and thought about whoever invented that.
I know.
put them in like some hut.
Yeah.
Probably not in the hut because there would be no windows. So they'd be sitting outside, knitting under maybe a little bit of a roof. Maybe it's raining. I don't know. And they're like, you know what? I need this tube thing to take an L turn. How are we going to do that? And their brain and I'm like, every time I'm like, our ancestors were so clever.
I'm convinced it was a mother gnome that did it. Right?
Man, every time I'm like, I don't know how many pairs of socks I've knit now. And every time I'm like, wizardry.
No. And the thing is, for me, is what people get so hung up about picking up the stitches. But in my group, I'm telling them, I'm like, you guys relax. Honestly, picking up the gusset, if you do your heel flap correctly with a hip slip stitch on the side, so it's easy to see, if you pick up those stitches, it's not any harder than Judy's magic cast on. Come on. It's not that hard. Go through it with me slowly. And so that's the tutorial we're doing right now. And people are like, I'm like, calm down. You can do it. It'll be okay.
And picking up stitches is literally just sticking your needle through a hole, like anywhere, and pulling yarn through.
A small crochet hook if you need to, that's fine. But what I enjoy so much, what I was saying last night on my video, is that you can customize this bit by how wide this is, by how many stitches you choose to leave in the middle, and then make the heel wider or shorter. You know, you customize it, the circumference of it, by how long the heel flap is or isn't, whether you have high arches or whether you don't. And I'm trying to get everyone to understand this. Anyway, love it. I'm right there with you. Yep. But I have giant feet. So there have been times where toe up has served me well because I wear a women's size 12.
Oh, so running out of yarns in it. A scary thing.
Yes, these I'm knitting for my daughter. And so hopefully it will be okay. I may be playing yarn chicken anyway, because she wears a size 9.5, and this was about a 380 yard.
That is tight for that size.
And I've got like 9 stitches per inch.
Yeah, but your leg is pretty short. Like I'm looking at that compared to how, like I have about a size 8.5, 9 foot. And I, one of the things I love knowing is how long bits of my hand are. I don't know if you do, but like from here to here is 7 inches for me. Yeah. And from here to here is 3. And so I do a lot of my sock measuring like with my hand because I'm on the go.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we're good.
I actually saw somebody that tattooed a ruler on the side. Okay. Because, you can't remember, or I don't know. I thought that was a riot. So you were talking about knitting your husband a bunch of socks this year. Does he have gargantuan feet, or is he like, average, it's going to be okay?
He's got men's size 10. So.
Oh, that's like my feet. That's not bad.
No, it's a pretty reasonable thing. And he doesn't like his legs really long. Like some guys I've seen, like husbands, like there's really tall, but he's not like that. He's like about a 7 or 8 inch leg. And then he is a color fiend. I've actually like insisted on making him some plain socks because I'm like, I kind of feel like you need at least 2 that would work at a formal meeting. Like, he works at a university as a librarian, so it's a pretty informal crowd, but
fantastic.
But still, like,
you guys are
a certain
cool.
level of like. his favorite colors are like purple and yellow and lime green and like preferably striped. So,
Great. You guys are awesome. That's fantastic. Wow. So do you have all of the socks that are super colorful and stripy that you've made for him? Are they all like on your Ravelry page? Because now I want to look.
I think I've got over 300 projects listed there. And so one of my favorite, here's another yarn reference, another link for you to look up, but there is a Canadian dyer called Turtle Toes, and she does self-striping, and he loves her stuff. He loves the feel of it. His feet are a little hard on it, but he loves the colors. They're so bright. And
that's great. So I'm glad I will knit toe up, but I definitely prefer cuff down. And it seems like, don't you think there was a time when everybody was like, ooh, it's got to be toe up, it's got to be toe up. And I still find that in my group. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with toe up. Absolutely not. There's not. I think it's just your preference and what you get used to.
Yeah, I think it is definitely like sock knitting becomes a familiarity thing for a lot of us, right? It's something, I think one of the reasons we like it is because for the most part, we don't have to swatch. And you just get a sense of, okay, with this yarn, I'm going to cast on this many stitches on these needles, I'll be fine, because it's negative ease. And if it's a little less negative ease than perfect, it's still negative ease. Yeah. And so I think people approach a lot of sock knitting as just like their comfort knitting. Well,
and if you throw in some ribbing, you even have more forgiveness and, Yeah. But I think a lot of the newer knitters, particularly, they like toe up because it feels like the toe part is the swatch, and it's not so much to rip out if it's wrong. And I understand that. I get that. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think also a lot of newer knitters are very much into podcasts and video podcasts. And I swear 70 to 80% of podcasters seem to like their socks toe up. And so it becomes just sort of the norm, which is fine if that fits your foot.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is when I look at my YouTube analytics, it tells you your most watched video and all that, and, watch minutes and stuff. So far, my playlist that's the most accessed is the customizable toe up, because what I've done is taken the slip stitch heel, reversed it so that this is on the bottom. So it's exactly the same. The heel turn and all that is exactly the same, but you knit it from the toe up, you do your heel flap, you do the turn, and then you keep going, but it's just flipped.
Interesting. So the actual, like the ridgy bits underneath your foot?
Right. Because that's where I wear out my socks is on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I bet that's great for the wear.
Yeah. And then even then, when I do my heel turn, I still carry on the slip stitch around the bottom.
Oh.
See how the ridges are there still?
Yeah.
Yeah, I still carry that through. And you can just continue on. I mean, I usually try to carry that on because that's where I wear out. I have never worn through a pair of socks on the back of the heel. It's always on the bottom. And so I don't, honestly, aside from the look of it, I don't understand why we even do this on the back.
Well, I think that for a lot of people, that is a point of friction.
Yeah.
Because we do it, we don't wear it out.
Right. Well, good point. And so I like to continue the slip stitch through the heel turn onto the bottom and then carry it on. So, but once you join back up in the round, you pick up your gussets, join back up in the round, you just have to remember, is this a plain knitting row or is this a row where I go slip one, knit one, slip one, knit one?
Right.
Because obviously you're not purling your way back as
so you don't have that clear visual distinction between which row is which. But
it's easy to alternate. I mean, you can tell, you can look at it and see, oh yeah, that was a slipped row, and now I'm going to knit this one plain and then carry on.
Yeah, because of the row that you slipped on, there'll be like those little
carries behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can see it, right? And I mean, you're a designer. You wouldn't have any problem at all. Because you know what's going on.
Reading your knitting is one of the things that is huge, and it's something I really try to teach people. I remember the first scarf I knit when I was that adult picking it back up to learn, and it was like a knit 3 purl 3 scarf, and I would get partway through a row and something on TV would be interesting. I'd be like, oh no, I can't remember. Did I knit 2 or purl 3 or whatever? And I would have to tink back the whole row and start again, because I could only I'd be like knit 1 2 3, purl 1 2 3, and this was right when I was a baby knitter. And then I was like, there's got to be a way to tell, because I can see that the ribbing is doing something different, that the knit column looks different than the purl column, because that's why it's ribbing. And so I started looking as I was knitting and going, oh, that's what a purl stitch looks like. That's what it. And then I remember trying to figure out, if you do it, knit 2 together, is the row where you see the stitches crossed, is that the row you decreased on? or is that the row below? And really starting to look right at the beginning, because I hated having to have a piece of paper with me or a row counter. Mm-hmm. I wanted it to be easier than that.
Yeah, so you have an analytical mind where you are observant and you look back and you see, like one of my recent videos, because we were doing a lace section, we did a shawl knit along, and it was a shawl knitted on the bias. It was called the Inara wrap.
Oh yeah, I love that one.
Anyway, we did it just a couple months ago, and so you knit it on the bias, and then there's a section of lace, and people were just freaking out. I'm like, all right, you have to learn to read your knitting. And so I did a video on that, like what to do if, you know, your cat messes up your knitting, or you drop it, or things, or your needle comes off in your bag, or something happens. How do you go about determining where you were? And so I did a video on tinking techniques and and reading your knitting, because people were super upset and freaking out about it. Yeah. But I think you're right.
Learn to read your knitting. All of a sudden, you're freed from the pattern. You're freed from the checklist.
Yeah, I think that you are liberated from that. You know, if you have a pattern that you can remember what to do next. I mean, I have patterns that obviously I have to take the paper with me because I can't remember it all.
Yeah.
But you're not totally sunk if you make a mistake. You know, you can tink it back. And I tell people, if you're knitting a lace section or even this pattern that we're doing now, and you don't know where you are, or something happens and you can't tell where you are in the chart because your needles fell out or a baby got a hold of it or whatever, you know, shit happens, right?
Oh, yeah.
So tink it back and write down what you're taking out, and then go back and reverse it and look on the pattern to see where you were.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I like the patterns I design, I try to design them to be fairly intuitive. So they might look pretty complicated, but actually when you get going, I want, personally, and also for you guys, but for me, and I want to be free from a chart for the most part. I mean, not the cabled gnomes. I'm sorry, that's a little hard. But on the other hand, they're so sculptural. Like, you should get a sense of, oh, well, this is a closing round, this is an opening round. So you don't necessarily have to look every stitch.
No, and you do get a sense, as with most cables, you get a sense of the overs and unders and what's coming next. If you're paying attention and noticing, you can anticipate that, even if you need to refer back.
Yeah, but I mean, so maybe not the cabled gnome, but for a lot of the stuff I knit, I want it to look fantastic and look a bit like wizardry, but actually the process is pretty intuitive once you get into it and you can start to see a logic. And that's just because I really want to be able to do knitting and.
Right.
I knit and watch sports. I knit and talk to people. I knit and play board games. I knit and read, and I don't want to have to be.
Yeah, I can't do that. I can't knit and read at the same time.
Only
if it's just, it's stockinette, maybe.
Yeah, that's one reason why I wanted this one to be so simple. There's a book I want to read.
So that kind of is a really good segue to my kind of my last question. And unless there's other things you want to talk about, that's totally fine. But like, what we always in the group talk about, like Netflix knitting. Like, what are people watching that are fantastic shows? Roy, what's some of your best Netflix suggestions?
All right, so Lost in Space, the reboot, is incredible. Okay. Absolutely amazing. I love that. I also, Ryder and I right now, we are watching, it's so funny, we've gotten into this this British gardening expert called Monty Dawn, and right now he's got like Monty Dawn's tour of Italian garden history. And so we've just finished Italy and we're about to move on to France. But he goes to these amazing gardens and then tells you about, like, well, this is typical of the first gardens in the Renaissance, when they were rediscovering the ideals of Rome and Greece, and how did they interpreted it? And then why were they doing this? Like, why were cardinals and princes planting these kinds of gardens? And what kind of, well, it was all about power. And it was about this. And he would talk about, well, this is how they used gardening as a form of display. And like, what were people doing in these gardens? And then he'd say, and then, well, things started to change. So what was the next trend? So we'd go to some other stunning garden. So, I mean, talk about soothing knitting watching. I mean, it's this guy with his accent walking through gardens that are just like, oh, yeah, I love it. So yeah, Monty Dawn is absolutely, I think it's one of Netflix's gems.
Yeah, never seen that one. Great.
Yeah, and then there's Nailed It. I don't know if you've watched that. I don't like reality TV. but the Nailed It baking show is hysterical.
Oh, is that one of those things where it's like, I saw this on Pinterest and then I tried it myself and I failed? And
except it's not like, it's so that's where the phrase comes from, but they actually bring in 3 completely ordinary people, some of which you've like pancakes are baking to them, and then they give them an unreasonably short amount of time. And then it's hosted by a comedian and she's hysterical. So Nailed It is really funny if you're looking for something like that.
Yeah. And so, favorite knitting podcast besides yours?
Well, I don't listen to mine because that's awkward.
Well, no, but you do have to listen when you edit it. So yeah.
I talked my sister into being my editor.
Oh.
Yeah. I was like, you know what? With starting the business and everything, I have learned so much in the last few years. Could you learn this for me, please? And so yeah, like I do the show notes and she does the editing, and we call her the sound monkey. But that's just, I love it. So we
mentioned Grocery Girls. They're hysterical.
Yes.
Although, like I was saying earlier, and I don't recall if we were recording then or not, but I really enjoy them, but their podcasts are lengthy, and which is fine because I just leave it on the background and I knit, when I'm making dinner or washing dishes or I'm knitting or I'm, I have something else going on, or even when I'm on my walk, maybe I'll have it on YouTube on my phone if I have data, if you can do that. So I don't listen. I usually sit down and listen to the whole 90-minute thing, but I keep it up on my window and then as I'm able,
Yeah.
Which is what people have to do with this one because we're awesome and long.
So for video podcasts, I really like Stranded by Amy Florence. She is in the UK, and she also dyes yarn, and she's just full of energy, and she threw out all of her store-bought sweaters and says, no, I'm only going to wear sweaters I've knit, and chucked them all. And she could have been, I think she's like she knits like 10 sweaters a year right now, and I am just like in total envy, right? And socks and this, and so she's full of energy and lots to talk about. So that's Stranded. I do a lot more audio podcasts.
Yeah.
And what I like about them is I can do them when I wish I was knitting. So like I'll go for a run and I'll listen and I can pretend I'm knitting. And
well, I was just going to say that, like when I'm out walking, I've started doing a lot of walking in preparation for this huge backpacking trip I have coming up this summer. And so that'd be great for me, just an audio podcast. It doesn't use as much data as...
Yeah, no, and they're nice. They download and then they're there. So right. I really, really like the Prairie Girls, Knit and Spin.
Okay.
They are so sweet. They're clearly like good friends for them the longest time, and they make me laugh. And then there's the Yarniacs.
Okay.
I like podcasts where 2 people are talking, because then what I get to do is I get to pretend I have a knitting group and that I'm sitting in a room with friends and that people like me.
Oh, we love you.
Oh, one more I want to mention is Down Cellar Studio.
Okay.
Boston Jen hosts that, and what I love about her is she does not have children of her own, but she has a big Irish Boston family, and she is always knitting for her nieces and her nephews and her mom, and there is a feeling of like knit together family about her podcast that is really awesome. And she's also she's a goal setter. I like her. She does like happiness projects where she tries a different happiness habit every month, or she sets little goals, and then she talks about that on her podcast. So it's not just knitting, it's also sort of like, because knitting adds to our lives, but other things also add to our lives. And so I love that for her. That's
tell me the name again.
Down Cellar Studio.
Okay. So DOWN, like down.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it sounds like it's a phrase they use in Boston, like, oh yeah, I'm going down cellar.
Oh, so they say it as if they're going downstairs, like down to the basement.
Yeah, it sounds like a phrase. Like there's just something about it that I've never actually asked her, and I should.
Well, that's interesting. We'll put a link to that down below. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to, like, personal plug? If a shameless plug, go ahead.
Okay, totally shameless plug. I am this week designing my very first mystery knit along, and it's going to be a gnome.
Really?
Yeah, I'm so excited.
I might have to know about this. Oh, do you see Nate?
I do. He's right there. I can see him, and he's wonderful.
This was the first one. Now, he doesn't have arms because I ran out of time, but then my kids were like, I don't think he needs arms. And I'm like,
they don't always need arms. They have their own needs.
So yeah, so I gotta put his beard. I need to tack his beard back down, or not.
I just knock that and hide it, and you don't have to.
But this was my first one, and this is actually Malabrigo sock.
Oh, there you go.
And and it's a wonderful way to use up tidbits for sure.
I know.
But it's fantastic, and I added this into my video about using up scraps, ideas for using up scraps. Well, I didn't have any of those like pellet plastic.
Yeah.
I don't have any of that, and I'm not driving an hour to the nearest craft store.
Did you use beans? I use beans in a lot of mine.
I could have. I didn't think of that. That would have been smarter.
Did you use rocks?
I did. So
awesome.
I have wool because I have many fleeces in my closet. Yes. So I just took some clean wool and stuffed him with wool. And I took rocks from the driveway and washed them, let them dry.
Yep. I started with beans and lentils because I knew I wasn't giving them to kids and I wasn't going to wash them.
Oh, right.
Like, I think it'd be kind of hysterical if no one was just like sprouting.
Your beans, your gnome had like sprouts growing out the sides from the lentils. And
it'd be funny for like 2 weeks and then it'd be horrifying. It'd just get gross.
I wonder if your gnome would explode.
I think it would just kind of get rotted or like, cause you'd have to,
That's true. It wouldn't explode because, it's breathable.
Yeah.
But that'd be bad. But I just thought, and then I discovered the one with the cabling, which I don't have that because I knitted a couple of them and I sent them away for Christmas packages. I sent one to my sister in her care package.
Yeah.
So I have it on my project page in Ravelry, but I don't have it in my possession anymore because it went to live at my sister's house. And then I made one for my mom. She loved it. So I don't have the two. And I think those are a lot more wizardry.
Yes. It's funny, when we were designing them, my brain, I kept calling them dwarves because they're very Lord of the Rings. Like, it's like if the Lord of the Rings Weta Workshops people designed Gnome, I feel like Here We Gnome Again might be.
But I love those. So now, I've made three, including this one. And I have Nate's mate is on the needles. I've about done the hat, but yeah. So Nate's waiting for his wife.
Yep.
He's waiting patiently for his wife. He's like my little guardian dude back there. But that's how I found you originally so I'm excited about the mystery. When is that going to start?
Sometime in March. And one of the things I'm going to do is, because I started doing the whole YouTube stuff in support, is I'm probably going to do, in addition to sending out the clues weekly, I will probably have a video for anything that week's clue might need, interpreted quite a lot for beginners. So
will this be a paid pattern then? Will this be a paid? Okay. But I want to say thank you, Sarah, for taking time out of your morning to meet with us. That's fantastic to meet you. And I'm sure I hope to see you again in our group, or maybe even one day in person.
That'd be amazing. That'd be so awesome. Thanks so much for having me.